As repeatedly said throughout the first 13 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, that the goal is to become liberated, to get out of the ropes of material nature, to become free. Now he will discuss this. Krishna says, when one properly sees that in all activities no other performer is at work than these modes of nature, and when one knows the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental to all these modes, then one attains my spiritual nature. So yes, we are busy in this material world, but what actually is happening is simply the reaction of the senses and the body and the mind with the modes of nature. And as we learned yesterday in our previous chapter, number 13, actually the soul does nothing at all. And Krishna reminds us here of something he said in chapter 4, that actually although he is here in this material world when he descends as an avatar, actually he's never influenced by the modes of nature. He doesn't contact the modes of nature. He doesn't become entangled. So if one can understand all this, then what does Krishna say? You attain his spiritual nature. And we have repeated several times, Krishna's spiritual nature is Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, knowledge, and blissful. And that is your constitutional position. And Krishna will mention this at the end of this chapter. Continuing. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes associated with the material body, one can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. So, this is why we should transcend the modes of nature and not remain in this material world. Because as long as we remain in this material world, it doesn't matter, even in the topmost planet or the lowest, you're still going to experience the material distresses of birth, old age, disease, and death. Nectar, Amrita, that's on the spiritual platform, the transcendental platform. Nectar, real happiness, spiritual bliss, Ananda, that can only be achieved when one transcends these three modes of nature. Krishna continues. Now, Arjuna interrupts Krishna with a very important inquiry. O my dear Lord, by what symptoms is one known who is transcendental to these three modes? What is one's behavior? And how does one transcend the modes of nature? This is a good question of Arjuna's. Krishna just said that if you transcend the modes, then you can regain your spiritual nature like his. So Arjuna wants to know, what are the symptoms? How do I achieve it? Let's listen. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O son of Pandu, one who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present, nor longs for them when they disappear, who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active, who is situated in the self and regards alike happiness and distress, who looks upon a piece of earth, stone, or gold with an equal eye, who is equal toward the desirable and the undesirable, who is steadily situated equally well in praise and blame, honor and dishonor, who treats alike both friend and enemy, and who has renounced all material activities. Such a person is said to have transcended the modes of nature. We could summarize this by saying that a person who has transcended the modes of nature is completely neutral and indifferent to what is happening here in this material world. One has no interest in this material world. This is something Krishna has repeated several times throughout Bhagavad Gita. Krishna gave a similar answer when Arjuna asked a similar question in chapter 2. What are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is merged in transcendence? Now, in the final 2 verses of this chapter, these 2 verses are very, very important. Listen most carefully. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. This verse is so important because Krishna has now answered the question, how do I? In the previous verse, he explained the symptoms of someone who is transcendental. But more important is how to become transcendental. And what did Krishna say? Devotional service. And we have heard this repeatedly throughout Bhagavad Gita. Krishna has remained consistent. He has not wavered. He has been saying the same thing. Unalloyed devotional service, uninterrupted, constantly, without any stoppage. And when one can do this, then at that point, one has transcended these 3 modes of nature. It is all a question of how much I can engage in this devotional service. Hearing, chanting, remembering, praying, worshiping, serving, befriending, and giving everything to Krishna. All these activities, when they are centered upon Krishna, and if it's done 24/7, then one has at once transcended. And he says, comes to the level of Brahman. The level of Brahman is my eternal position as the servant of God. And I regain my true nature, my true identity, blissful, full of knowledge and eternality. Now, in the final verse, Krishna will explain Brahman. And I am the basis of this impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and which is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. So ultimate happiness is spiritual, transcendental happiness. Now, why is this verse so important? One of the most important verses. Because Krishna is saying, I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman. There are different classes of transcendentalists, and sometimes there is big arguments which or who is or what is the ultimate phase of the absolute truth. Here Krishna answers it definitively. He himself, his transcendental form, his person, is the basis of the impersonal manifestation. He also mentioned this in chapter 12, when Arjuna asked the question, which is better? Should I meditate on your personal form or worship you impersonally? And Krishna gave the definitive answer, to worship his personal form, whereas those who worship the impersonal form simply were to get trouble. But still there are some people who think that the form of Krishna, the body of Krishna, is a manifestation of this impersonal Brahman. They have it backwards. And for such persons, Krishna has spoken this verse. No, the impersonal Brahman is resting upon the existence of Krishna's form. Krishna's body, Krishna's form, what is emanating from that is a light, a brilliant light and that is what we call the impersonal Brahman. But as he says in this verse, I am the basis. In the actual Sanskrit, Brahmano hi pratishta aham, that this Brahma Jyoti, the light, the effulgence coming off of Krishna's body, is not independent of the body and form of Krishna. It is Krishna who is the origin of all, not the impersonal Brahman. This we should glean from this final verse of this chapter, that Krishna, his form, his body, is the last word in the absolute truth. And everything else, whether it be Paramatma, the super soul manifestation, or Brahman, his effulgence, is all subordinate to the form and body of Krishna himself. And therefore, if we want to appreciate this constitutional position of ultimate happiness, then we should immediately engage in devotional service. And the easiest way is to chant his holy name, as recommended by Lord Chaitanya. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Namaiva Kevalam. Klo Naskiva, Nastiva, Nastiva Gatiranyata. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 15, which has 20 verses, is entitled The Yoga of the Supreme Person. In Sanskrit, the Supreme Person is known by the word Purushottama, which is actually two words, Purusha Uttama. And we will see in this chapter how Purusha Uttama is Krishna. In the first section of this chapter, we will get an understanding of reality and its perverted reflection. And it will not be what you are probably thinking. Listen carefully. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. The branches of this tree extend downward and upward, nourished by the three modes of material nature. The twigs are the objects of the senses. This tree also has roots going down, and these are bound to the fruitive actions of human society. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this strongly rooted tree with the weapon of detachment. Thereafter, one must seek that place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything has begun and from whom everything has extended since time immemorial." So, this material world that you and I live in is a perverted reflection of the reality. So if the world we're living in is a perverted reflection, where is the reality? Well, Krishna mentioned that. That place from which, having returned, one never comes back here, indicates the spiritual world, the abode of Krishna. That is the reality. This world that we live in is a perverted reflection. Let me give you a good example. Where is there the experience of an upside-down tree? Well, if you're standing on one bank of a lake and on the other side, across the lake, is a tree. If you look in the water, the tree will present itself upside down. Therefore, this material world that we are living in is an upside down tree, or a perverted reflection of the reality. And Krishna was saying again what he has said many times: how to get out of it, how to cut down this perverted tree. Very simple. You have to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself, because he is the absolute truth. It is from he that everything is coming. Krishna continues, those who are free from false prestige, illusion, and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are freed from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how to surrender unto the Supreme Person, they attain to that eternal kingdom. So the eternal kingdom, that's the reality. And the symptoms were given very much similar to what he said in the previous chapter about the symptoms of one who has transcended the modes of nature. You have to surrender to Krishna. He said that in chapter 7 also, that he said, my material energy, it is Krishna's material energy, is insurmountable, most difficult. But if you surrender to me, Krishna says, you can easily cross beyond it. Same thing again. You want to get out of this perverted reflection? You want to cut down this strongly rooted tree of material illusion? Only one way, surrender to Krishna. And you can surrender to Krishna right now if you want. Simply chant along with me, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Now, Krishna will describe a little bit about his supreme abode. That supreme abode of mine is not illumined by the sun nor moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. This is great news, giving us great hope, that if we can reach Krishna's abode, we don't have to come back to this material world. It is self-illumined, no need of a sun or a moon, because here in this material world, everything is dark. We need a sun and moon and fire to light up everything, because by nature it's dark. But in Krishna's abode, everything is self-luminous, and everything is ultimately resting upon Krishna. He continues. In the next verses, 7 through 11, Krishna will help us to understand the position of ourselves as a conditioned soul. This is very informative. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. So this is the first thing, that we are not part of this material world. We are all sons and daughters, the children of God. We are little fragmental samples of Krishna. This is why Krishna said at the beginning in chapter 2, that never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. Because each and every one of us, having existed since time immemorial, just like Krishna, just like God, we've always existed. So we have the qualities of Krishna, but in a fragmental quantity. We have the qualities of Krishna, eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, but we don't have the quantity or the potentiality. We are fragmental parts of Krishna. The Sanskrit word in this verse, angsha. We are Krishna's fragmental parts, and the part is never equal to the whole. But we are Krishna's fragmental parts. We should understand. Remember in the previous chapter, he said that I am the seed-giving father of all living entities who take their birth in the womb of this material energy. So he is the father. He is everyone's father. Now he continues. Due to conditioned life, meaning this material world, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So the six senses, the hearing sense, the seeing sense, smelling sense, touching sense, and tasting sense. These are the five senses or knowledge acquiring senses. And there is the mind, which is the master sense, the subtle sense. And this is what's going on in this material world. We are struggling, simply trying to placate the demands of these material mind and senses. But Krishna all along, even in the previous chapter, has been telling us to transcend the body and mind by performance of devotional service. The living entity, conditioned by the material world, thinks that its business is to simply satisfy the demands or pushings of these material senses and mind. And the whole human race is going on under this misconception. But Bhagavad Gita began by Krishna indicating you're not your senses, you're not your mind, you're not a product of this material world. You are eternal. And now he is saying, not only are you eternal, you are my eternal fragmental part and parcel. You belong to me. If one can accept this, if one can surrender to Krishna and act as Krishna's fragmental part and parcel servitor, then one can transcend the modes of nature and no longer have to struggle in this material world. He continues. The living entity in this material world carries his or her different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus, one takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. We learned this in chapter 2 as well, that even in this body we are seeing how the body is changing from boyhood to youth to old age to death, but the soul remains the same. Here Krishna has again reiterated the concept, a very basic concept, of transmigration of the soul, that you're going to be taking different kinds of bodies, all depending on the mentality that one has been fostering in this human form of life. So it is very important to make the right decisions of life, to become Krishna conscious, so that one does not have to take another material body again. Krishna continues. The living entity, thus taking another gross body, attains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue,